Hello and welcome to Cannamantv. My name is Connor McLeod. In this exclusive interview, I get the chance to sit down and chat with Suzanne Kelly from the Scottish Cannabis Oil Assistance Programme. The Scottish Cannabis Oil Assistance Programme is a charitable organisation which has helped thousands of patients source the cannabinoid-based medicine they so desperately require, but have been unable to receive it through official channels due to UK government restrictions. Now primarily a lobbyist group, SCOAP holds accountable those that have inhibited the ability for patients to get the medicine they so desperately require. So make sure and like and subscribe, and stick around until the end so you don't miss out on the end of episode cartoon. Now then, let's talk cannabis. Suzanne, thank you very much for chatting with me.
Thanks for the invite, Connor.
So what is the Scottish Cannabis Oil Assistance Programme, and what led to its foundation?
Right, the Scottish Cannabis Oil Assistance Programme, or SCOAP, which is much easier, came about approximately 3 years ago. I work as a journalist, part-time, full-time, and I was doing something for the online newspaper Aberdeen Voice that I've been associated with for many years. I was talking to a musician named Cousy Johns, and we were supposed to just talk about his music and what he's been doing lately, but then we got on the subject of his fibromyalgia. Now, I had known him from way back years ago in London, and I was really shocked at how far down he had gone health-wise, and it was a terrible thing to see. And then he started talking about how much cannabis products and cannabis oil was beneficial to him and the symptoms of that. I suppose that's one of the most common uses for cannabis oil, is to treat and help alleviate the symptoms of fibro. So I knew he didn't have much money. At the time, I was fairly flush because of what I was doing for work. And it started informally with me saying, well, would you like me to try and get you some oil? It had just newly become legal to buy oil products in this country. And so I did that a couple of times for him, and I thought, there's all kinds of people out there who need help. There's all kinds of crazy crossed wires in the UK's laws about what you can and can't do in terms of oil importation, what you have to call it. And I think you still have to call it a food supplement, unless you're Mr. Theresa May. Anyway, so it grew from me buying oil from him to thinking there ought to be a charity because oil was so expensive at the time. And then I thought, nothing is stopping me from starting one up. I also thought it would be a good test because to get SCOAP officially recognized by Oscar really was lots and lots of loopholes to jump through. But it was also a good opportunity to explain to people in the charity sector who permit charities to exist that no, cannabis oil does not have any THC in it. It is not an intoxicant. It is used by thousands and thousands of people who have problems with fibro, other illnesses such as epilepsy. For cancer, it helps people with chemo. This is all down to the anecdotal evidence and increasing evidence coming out from the medical community and from good old-fashioned research and proper studies. And so off we took. When I finally got the Oscar approval, we started out and we started buying oil for people. Over the years, our remit has changed.
One of the frustrating things, just what you mentioned there, that you have to continuously say that THC is absent. THC is extremely medicinal, extremely therapeutic, and yet we're still in the cave area where it's like we have to proclaim that it is absent. It's almost like taking it, like half the medicine is now not as potent.
You're so absolutely right, Connor. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on you there, but it is very frustrating. Of all of the substances that people use to get a buzz or a high, I can't think of any that has better therapeutic values that are applicable, measurable, and it's crazy. It's I think that's the word for it. These systems that the government has in place. We now have a government that says, yes, we're going to grow medical marijuana if you're related to Theresa May and if you're connected to the right people, then you can get a license and grow it in this country. But we're not going to let you sell that in the country, and we're going to make it really hard for anybody else to do a startup. We recognize it's got therapeutic value, but we're not writing any prescriptions. We're allowing people to buy cannabis oil products that, well, so as you know, the quality and the concentration ranges dramatically. But try and get a doctor to write you a prescription for that. And that's even without the THC in it. I will keep most of my powder dry until you ask me further questions, but frustrating, absolutely.
Well,
Outrageous.
what is the most common medical condition? You mentioned that your friend here that initially started the charity had fibromyalgia, but what was through your experience, what was the most common condition that continuously kept popping up when patients were requiring medicine?
Cancer, nausea from cancer, chemotherapy. Those I think have been the top ones for me. But also people in chronic pain. I'm sorry, I've just moved my table. That won't do you any good for your continuity.
No, that's okay.
People in chronic pain. In fact, some of the people who helped set up SCOAP have chronic pain, and they say that THC particularly is beneficial to them, but they also get benefit from cannabis oil with the THC removed. I would say that cancer top, epilepsy, and then probably fibro. Those are the top three ones. I'll just say on my own behalf, I have this weird medical condition. It's thankfully not too debilitating unless it strikes. It's called cyclic vomiting syndrome, and it's every bit as unpleasant as it sounds. People who had migraines as a child or in early childhood and grew out of them can get a sort of stomach migraine instead. And the nausea is really unbearable. The pain from when you start getting sick is unbearable. Cannabis oil helps, THC helps. There's all sorts of very complex chemical drugs that can help too. If I had my way, I'd be using THC for it. Absolutely.
It's actually sadly ironic with you say that it's your cyclic vomiting syndrome, because one of the things that have came out in the past few years is almost like a counterbalance to how positive the reports have been, is this cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, which they associate of a circumstance which is, as you described, this infrequent vomiting that is long lasting over the course of days, weeks, and all these kind of things. And what they've found through various investigative circumstances is that it's actually associated to a growing technique that's largely based on an industrial fertilizer that also produces these effects. And frustratingly, it seems like they're trying to amplify this cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, as a
Yeah.
countermeasure, because cannabis is so beneficial. So, I mean, why do you think charities such as yourself? Oh, I think you went already there. There we go. So
Yeah, just for a sec.
that's okay. So why do you think charities such as yourself, your assistance program, are so desperately required in the space at the moment?
Right. Further to what you say, you have to wonder if people aren't wanting to see cannabis completely kept out of the medicine cabinet. People with serious financial interests in doing so. The fertilizer, we're pretending that this medical cannabis is something people can't possibly grow medical cannabis at home. That's, of course, as you'll know, a nonsense.
Yeah.
You don't need to have tons of fertilizer. You don't need to have tons of chemical. In fact, it's counterintuitive. You don't need it for a plant like this that weed virtually grows as a weed. But the people who have all kinds of expensive pharmaceutical drugs that do the job of freely available cannabis, they don't want it out there, do they? Assuredly not. So I believe this is being played up. People like me and my charity, well, at the moment we stopped buying cannabis for people. We're mostly trying to lobby. I see the biggest stumbling block is the giant pharma that want to keep cannabis out of your medicine cabinet, and the government people who have interests, whether they're financial or conservative values, so-called, or otherwise. They want to stop this. And so we lobby behind the scenes. We're not necessarily the most visible organization you'd find out there, but we're trying to pin down the people who are stopping, the clearly, it's clearly essential, the evolution of cannabis. People are trying to stop that from happening. I think it should be available to anybody who wants it and can use it responsibly. Absolutely. So we lobby at the moment and concentrate much more on that than we do on the actual buying of cannabis for people at the moment.
Yeah, that is just when you mentioned a minute ago there about the one of your most like the top of your list is cancer, people that have cancer and all that kind of thing that require medicine. Frustratingly, on every single medicinal format that has been written based on cannabis, they always exclude that situation of that cannabis is an extremely potent anticarcinogenic and instigates apoptosis and these normal regulatory body processes, and yet they omit it as it's non-applicable. We have epilepsy, we have these notions of even chronic pain. I mean, I think NICE, National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, they even omitted chronic pain as non-applicable for cannabis use, and yet it's the abundance of receptors that are present throughout the entirety of the body. It's extremely regressive, and it's almost absolutely reeking of some hidden agenda that doesn't really get displayed to the general public. They'll just see the authoritative body of NICE and take whatever they say as fact, you know, and it's really frustrating. And it's great that charities such as yourself are counterbalancing the situation, pushing against the misinformation. And that's what that is. It's misinformation, because cannabis is highly anti-carcinogenic, as you've mentioned. So I mean, I take it that's extremely frustrating for yourself when you're listening to these kind of things regularly appearing on the media, you know, and you know for yourself fine well through first-hand experience that this is just not the case.
Oh, there's so much to say from what you just said. First of all, particularly during this COVID lockdown time, this is a time neither you nor I would remotely want to, you know, attack the NHS's doctors and frontline staff. I personally think that not just on the cannabis issue, but in many ways, NICE has a lot to answer for. How many times have you heard of people who know that there's a drug out there of whatever kind, and NICE says, no, we're not going to buy it for you because it's too expensive or it's not fully tested out? In the meantime, all kinds of drugs that are not fully tested out that are pharmaceutical are being prescribed with all sorts of horrible effects up and down the country and in the USA. Think of all the antidepressant and opioid problems we have. It's outrageous. People greatly suffer from these. The side effects surely must have been known from some of them before they went into production. Things like Halcyon was meant to be a sleeping pill, and it's led to some severe mental illnesses in the people who used it, including violence and suicide and murders. In the States, if you are one of the victims of a drug that has given you a psychosis over a long period of use of time, the pharma industry is such that the name of the drug is highly unlikely to ever get mentioned in any of your court proceedings. It's all blocked out. I want to mention a plant. Have you heard the Kava study and survey? Kava, it's a herb used all around the world. I think it might be South American in origin. It's just a stimulant. One person in the UK, a single person, didn't use it the way that they were told to, and the herb was immediately blocked. People, for example, and Neil Jard could tell you more about the ins and outs of that. But we've got people who are very powerful, very quick to ban things that they don't want going on sale. And yet the things that they do want going on sale, they get them out there. And even when there are very, very deleterious side effects, getting these things taken off the market doesn't happen nearly fast enough, if at all. In terms of cancer patients, I think anybody with a terminal illness who wants to try any kind of drug that they want to without hurting anyone else, I think they should be allowed to do anything they want to. Can you imagine the sort of police officer or health person you'd have to be to try and get somebody in trouble with cancer for using marijuana? And yet it happens all the time. Sorry, I've just used the word marijuana there, and I try to avoid that. It's cannabis. But growing up in the 70s in New York, the word marijuana is always going to be stuck in my head somehow. It's small aside that comment.
No, that's no problem at all. Actually, it's you know, I doubt that any of you wouldn't be aware of that. You know,
Okay.
yeah, no, I can fully understand. One of the things actually that was posted up on Facebook recently on a cannabis law reform page was that they were highlighting that the police, because of the fact that there's been such relatively little crime, that they have been actively chasing medicinal growers, and they're proclaiming that these are factories, these are farms, these are people that are providing medicine. And at the same time, on the same page, the campaign founders actually described that these are the same people, that there's 2 or 3 police officers who have children who essentially use back channels to get the medicine for their children. And so that it's an extremely complex circumstance that you're dealing with people that are enforcing an unjustifiable law, and an extremely immoral law as well, because like you mentioned, cannabis is it's evolved with humans for thousands and thousands of years, literally hand in hand. We have a physiological system in our body that we're only aware of because of cannabis. We were only aware because of research in cannabis that we even have this endocannabinoid system. So we have cannabis, we have a lot to thank in regard to that, and yet we're still pursuing this extremely regressive circumstance, which is really frustrating for predominantly people that require medicine. You know, this is the reality that we're dealing with.
How do you live with yourself if you are, you know, a police officer and you're going to throw someone in jail for having and using cannabis when you're one of those people, as you say, who are sourcing it for their own recreation or for an ill person in their family, which goes on all the time? particularly during this corona time, is this at all a reasonable use of police activity and time to stop people who are doing homegrown? Makes absolutely no sense at all.
It is extremely annoying. There's clearly a systematic failing that organisations such as yourself really help to highlight, because it's often not regarded. I mean, the media will never report on these kind of things because it's a kind of, it contradicts their position. Let's be honest. They have invested interest in maintaining these circumstances. In the past few years, I think it's become undeniable that they have had to document CBD's efficiency. But they're still at that stage. The evident nature of the mainstream media is that they still omit THC. They still hold on to it as if it's the last demon, and the reality is cannabis, as you fully know, has 500 plus molecules in it. One of them, which is THC, is the only one that gets you psychoactively a response, and yet that's the demon, which is really frustrating. In particular, like we mentioned before, that it's highly anti-carcinogenic. It's extremely beneficial, not even if you have a medical condition, but just for general health and well-being.
Oh, so many issues there. If you listen to mainstream media of certain kinds, you would be led to believe that all sorts of cancer research organizations need billions of pounds to find the correct pharmaceutical cocktail of drugs to treat, prevent, and cure a variety of cancers and tumors. And yet, while we're doing all of this research, some of which I find highly unethical, particularly when it comes to using other living creatures, we've got a plant, people want to use it, it's not rocket science to grow it or to use it, and you have to ask yourself, why is this being stopped by governments and giant pharma? With giant pharma, I think we've got to be particularly careful. The Monsantos, it's great when they're dealt a blow, as has happened to them a few times recently, but people are trying to patent any gene and seed sequence they can string together. It's even happening to all sorts of innocuous plants and a lot of phytoestrogen plants. The Monsantos and various people are trying to copyright strains of that, as well as all the strains of cannabis that people are trying to patent and say, this is my cannabis and nobody else can grow it or use it without my say so and without paying me a royalty. We've got to be really careful there. If I were any more radical than I was, and I won't say this, but what I would say is if everyone were to start growing their own cannabis today across the country and made it a problem that could not be fought anymore, I think we'd be onto something in terms of getting giant pharma out of our government and out of our homes.
I think you've actually hit on the head with that there, because we are in a situation where the masses vastly outnumber the people that are in power, and yet they're under the illusion that they have to behave themselves. We've got to be careful, even though these people that are being so trepidatious about their activity, horticulturally grown cannabis, are aware, like, this is ridiculous. We're dealing with hypocrisy that I'm pretty certain that this is the longest standing hypocritical propaganda-based circumstance in human history. I fail to see another one. We've been lied to so long.
Sorry, it's as ludicrous as American prohibition, and think of all of the crime that directly caused. And cannabis is unfortunately the cause of crime here. A lot of people will tell you it's a gateway drug. I am not one of those people at all. Some people have all kinds of psychological or emotional reasons to want to get high. A lot of other people just find the benefits of cannabis to be something they can handle, deal with, and want to just get on with it, Yeah. And why are we stopping these people? You've hit about something about government too. People who think that way definitely outnumber the Theresa Mays and the Boris Johnsons. And if we get more and more people involved and elected to local government, I think we'll start to change things. That's really key, as is having alternative medias, such as your channel, and for example, such as Aberdeen Voice. Yeah, we've got to start changing things. And if the institutions that don't work are failing us, you either get in and change them from the outside or start your own institutions.
Like you mentioned a second ago there, the reality is that when people have mental illnesses, that's often a stigmatized position where people think that cannabis is inflammatory for mental illnesses. And by all rights, I mean, there are a small portion of this population, as there are with any form of product, any form of consumerist-based product, there will always be a small portion that are sensitive to the circumstance. Such an example that I often use is you have people that are epileptic, so they are very sensitive to flashing lights and stuff like that. But this doesn't stop movie makers and all that kind of thing producing films which contain these. What they do is they put a disclaimer in that warns these people. Exactly, that warns the people, that prevents them from being negatively influenced through what they're producing. It doesn't stop the action of them actually making it in the first place, and yet cannabis seems to be in a position where that liberty is not applied. It's like, well, if there are a small portion, as we all know, which is probably less than 0.1% of users, that the cannabis should be completely omitted. And one of the things I found was quite interesting is that cannabis is actually a favourite for individuals that have post-traumatic stress disorder, people that have schizophrenia, because it's these things, they like, as you're aware, it's homeostatic. It produces a balance within the brain.
I'm certainly not a very good biochemist. I know what I've read and things like that, but I most of my information is anecdotal, but I can promise you that people with post-traumatic stress disorder that have been in touch with me include veterans from conflicts both in the UK and USA, and it 100% helps them. And goodness knows they don't always get the help they need from government, and yet government wants to clamp down on them getting this tiny bit of relief. We've got to change it at all, but there's no one substance anywhere that you won't find somebody who's badly allergic to or who it hits their personal biochemistry wrongly. How many thousands of years have people smoked cannabis, and yet we're still here.
Yeah, tens of thousands of years. I mean, it's frustrating as well that we're in. I mean, this is 2020 now. We're halfway through the year, and it's been almost 2 solid years since cannabis became legal in the UK medicinally. Obviously, I say that. I say that with frustration, because when you say cannabis became legal medicinally, it implies a lot which I've not seen whatsoever. I mean, you're dealing with almost, I think it's 2 or 3 medicines at best, which are applicable to what, according to NICE and the NHS, 2 or 3 conditions at best, Lou Gout syndrome and stuff like that. What have you personally seen since 2018? Has there been any change whatsoever? Have you got the same amount of people asking for help?
I'm shaking my head in disbelief, and I totally agree with you. People write to us, and this is almost the pattern it usually follows. I have such and such disease or condition. I know that cannabis and THC benefit me, and I feel better when I'm using them. The products I can buy now that are really high quality are too expensive for me to afford. My doctor either doesn't believe that they're allowed to write a prescription, or they point blank refuse to. What can I do? And in those cases, we send people literature studies, testimonials, recent news articles, and still they can't get a prescription written usually. We tell them to, complain to NICE. Every complaint to NICE, by the way, helps, most definitely. The more we can show that people are demanding the use of THC and cannabis, the easier it will eventually, we hope, come to convince them to go ahead and do this. Doctors are just not writing the prescriptions. I think towards the end of last year, was it less than 200 people in the UK had a prescription for medical cannabis oil products?
Yeah,
something like that. Crazy.
Telegraph, the Telegraph actually put out an article that said that less than 12 prescriptions had been written in September 2019. So
I think I've got the figure of 180 somewhere UK-wide. Yeah. In any case, it's nothing like the demand. We know that. And what is going on is the question. The more people fight back and push back against people who say no to them, the better.
I mean, how do you feel about obviously, essentially you touched on it a minute ago about the systematic failing in the UK, about people, big people trying to put in structures that are going to be profitable to themselves only, that are not going to help the patients or the wider public and all that kind of thing. I mean, how do you feel when you see these private clinics that are popping up everywhere at a time where there's, I think it's documented that 1.5 million people are in need or regularly using cannabis through the black market because they're in such urgent need of cannabinoid medicine? I mean, how do you feel about these private clinics?
It's angering and it's depressing and it's a bit heartbreaking. We're taking advantage of people. We're basically holding them to ransom and extorting money out of them. We don't have to do this. They shouldn't be having to go through that. One of the recurring themes in the people who contact SCOAP is how stressful it is. Can you imagine having, a serious condition, and you know that by law you're allowed to have something, you know that it's beneficial to you, but you keep banging your head against a wall to a GP or somebody else who says, no, we're not going to write you a prescription for it. It's crazy. So they do resort to the black market. They do go to these clinics. Some people will go abroad and, have to spend the money traveling to places where they can get cannabis either affordably or be extorted when they get there. It's just so primitive. This does not belong in the year 2020.
Yeah, well, it certainly seems like, I mean, although we're dealing with such a difficulty, it does feel like we're almost about to experience perhaps a more drastic change than we've seen. And I think it's by no small part the coronavirus has had such a large impact on the economy. I think a lot of people are holding their fingers crossed extremely tightly, hoping that this that recreational cannabis will come in as somewhat of a financial boost. The only thing that I find slightly worrying is that in what form will it be a situation where you have two dispensaries over the entire UK. It's £55 a gram, relatively low quality.
I think what you've got there is some good information request material. What is the government planning to do is something we really have to find out. And we've got to try and get them not to do anything, just as you say. There are so many ways that it could go wrong. In fact, they might want it to go wrong, so they could use that excuse for a longer ban. Amsterdam is not without its problems, that's for sure. But when it's done correctly and where it's done correctly, medical cannabis cafes can be a huge financial boost, definitely.
Frustratingly as well.
Let's see that happening here. I don't see what would be the problem. As the old story goes, when's the last time you've seen a group of guys get stoned and then want to fight each other out in the street? And yet alcohol is the mainstay drug of this country's social life. I have, my hand up, I love my beer, and I love, a nice drink or two as well. But we know that alcohol is a depressant, and we know what it does to all of your internal organs. But it's the socially acceptable thing to do. Yeah. I think it's time that 2020 might, as you say, be the year to turn a lot of these things on their head.
Yeah.
I hope so.
It is very annoying that, and when you're mentioning alcohol in particular, because in most instances, when you do research into why there are acceptable social recreational substances, in theory the acceptance is based on a risk-reward scenario, whereas does the reward outweigh the potential health risks that could be it, and there has been no substance such as cannabis that has had such a low risk-reward ratio, and yet alcohol is almost laughable. If 1 in 5 deaths every minute is caused by alcohol, 5% of all deaths globally are caused by alcohol. And when you mentioned Amsterdam a minute ago there as well, Amsterdam have a drastically lower crime rate than the UK, than London, for instance. I mean, I think you're dealing with research last year. It was like 118,000 drug-related crimes in London, and then I think there was like 11,000 drug-related crimes in Amsterdam. These statistics are potent for individuals that are looking for the truth when it comes to cannabis, in particular the crime.
That's such a huge area as well too. One of the things I've been writing about and researching lately is the toll that all the county line gangs and cuckooing is taking on people here. Usually that does involve harder drugs, but when these gangs are recruiting, it's very often just using cannabis actually in that way as a gateway drug. They'll give kids a couple of joints and give them free weed and things for a while. Next thing you know, you're on a train to Newcastle carrying some Class A drugs with you, in quantity. Otherwise, it's some poor person who lives on their own or is in other way, vulnerable. Suddenly they've got new friends who want to come over just to smoke a joint or just to hang out. Next thing you know, their flat is being used for cutting up drugs and serious gang meetings and stuff. We had a case in Aberdeen. Did you hear about it at all? In the part of Aberdeen I lived in was called Torry. Lots of social deprivation up there, huge heroin problem. And this one person had experimented with heroin. We suspect he was cuckooed, and he died in his flat alone. Well, we believe that heroin dealers were with him at the time, but just scuppered. And when he stopped paying his rent and stopped going to his social worker meetings, nobody was answering his mail. so they sealed his flat with his body inside. So if you want to tell me, not you specifically, if the government wants to tell me that a good use of police is to get out there and stop my next door neighbors or whoever from growing a bit of weed in their garden when they know that they've got this gang, high, dangerous bunch of people running around the country, getting people killed, getting people hooked on all sorts of very dangerous drugs. Yeah, tell me something else, because that just doesn't wash with me.
Yeah, I fully agree. Cannabis should be that it should be a complete separation. I mean, even the fact that we're even having a discussion based on this extremely natural, holistic plant, and we're describing it in the same context as things such as dirty as heroin and stuff like that. I mean, that highlights the still ancient thinking that we're dealing with. I mean, 100 years ago there wouldn't have been this circumstance. It's almost a direct consequence of prohibition that we're even having this discussion based on, you know, where we should draw the line, kind of thing. You know, it's like they don't belong. It's like talking about saying that alcohol is the same as water. It's not the same at all. You know, it's not the same at all. But yeah, I mean, it's the only thing I was. So, what does your assistance program hope to achieve in the near future? More lobbying, as you mentioned.
More lobbying, more articles, more appearances such as this, just to highlight the awareness of how badly things are being done by this government. Something that is blatantly obvious in how the COVID situation is being handled. Letting people know that at the moment, cannabis supply and growing in this country is basically under Tory control, specifically Mr. Theresa May. He's the one person who's certainly got his finger in the pie and is controlling who's growing and who's supplying it. Convince people that they have a right to this drug, get them to demand it when they want it from their medical practices, and if they don't get it, they should complain to NICE. The more people who demand it, the more pressure, the better it would be. In a perfect world, I'd love to see people who believe in this issue strongly enough running even as a single party platform thing as an independent and trying to get in government and make change that way. It can work, it does happen. But just take care of yourselves. You know?
Excellent. Thanks, Suzanne. Would you like to add anything before we go?
I'd like to add, really be careful of any medical advice you're given from anybody. If you've got a serious complaint, you might want to try and get a second opinion. If you are a cancer patient and are being told that radio and chemo are the things you need to do, try and get a second opinion there too. It all depends on your individual circumstances. Remember that you're an individual and you should not be treated as if you're just on an assembly line when it comes to your health and your life.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. This has been highly enjoyable.
I've enjoyed it too, Connor. Really, thanks very much for having us on.
Thanks again to Suzanne and the Scottish Cannabis Oil Assistance Programme for giving me their time, and thanks to you for sticking around until the end of the video. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the content. I'll see you next time.